All right, we are back at it with our Emergence of the Americas in Global Affairs. And today we're going to talk about the Spanish American War and the nature and the effects of that war. But before we move on, I want to throw out a recommendation for you to follow the new rock band out of southeastern Michigan, Mind Riot. You can find them at Mind Riot Rocks on all of your socials. And you can even get a snazzy shirt like this at mindriotrocks.com. So now let's get on to the history. So we're going to start this story of the Spanish-American War on the Pacific Front. The Spanish-controlled Philippines immediately became a target for this war as the Secretary of Navy Theodore Roosevelt, soon to be American president, instructed the United States Asiatic Fleet to attack Spanish ships in the Philippines. American Commodore George Dewey would make contact with Filipino independence leader Emilio Aguinaldo to coordinate attacks with them. By April 30th, 1898, at the Battle of Manila, American ships sunk 10 Spanish ships with 0 U.S. casualties. American soldiers and Marines would then be joined by Filipinos who marched on to Manila and captured that city by August. Also, in July of 1898, American naval forces seized Guam, a small Spanish holding in the Pacific between Hawaii and the Philippines. In the Caribbean, American forces invaded Spanish holdings, supported by local independence movements, both in Cuba and Puerto Rico. In Cuba, an American expeditionary force made up of regular soldiers, regular army, and irregular militias. That's going to be featuring Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders as he stepped away from the Navy to join the war in Cuba. American and local forces would quickly overrun Spanish positions at locations like San Juan Hill and Santiago. There were relatively light American casualties, though yellow fever does ravage thousands, contributing to a greater understanding ultimately of its transmission through mosquitoes and its ultimate eradication. Let's give a shout out to Cuban doctor Carlos Finlay and American doctor Walter Reed. And that's where we Americans have our Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C. In Puerto Rico, once the war began, Puerto Rico would be seen as an important future outpost in the Eastern Caribbean for the Americans. And locals would welcome American troops, and the Spanish were quickly overrun on that island. By August, the peace process is already beginning. Spain agreed to leave Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam. Future status of those holdings would be handled at a Paris Peace Conference. Get comfortable with the concept of a Paris Peace Conference. A lot of meetings are going to be held there. And that's going to begin in the next month. No Cubans or Filipinos or Puerto Ricans were invited to this conference. But for Cubans, at least, the Teller Amendment would give them some comfort that America was not out to annex Cuba. The Treaty of Paris would ultimately be agreed to, and Cuban independence would be earned with American occupation of Puerto Rico and Guam to be controlled by the United States, and the Philippines to be sold to America for $20 million. This would cement the United States' position as one of the great powers of the world. Now, the annexation of Philippines is going to come next, and that occupation would create an American version of a European-style imperialist conquest. Now, new American President Theodore Roosevelt, who will follow the presidency of William McKinley and his assassination in 1901, was more expansionist and saw the Philippines as a vital military outpost. The combined ideologies and justification of social Darwinism and white supremacy, along with the focus on the civilizing mission and ideas of nationalism, would drive American sentiments towards holding the Philippines. Now, in support of annexation, we want to remember that perclusive imperialism. If the United States just walked away after driving the Spanish out, Germany, the UK, or Japan would be stepping in. For the Filipinos, they perceived American leadership. They were perceived by American leadership as incapable of self-government. Obviously, this is a racist notion, but the United States did not look onto the Filipino people as if they could actually govern themselves. So statehood would not be an option. Colonization would be the alternative. Belief in the civilizing mission to raise Filipino living standards and introduce Christianity was also a driving focus in support of annexation. But few American leaders, including William McKinley himself, had ever even been there. And if they had, they might have noticed that since the Spanish colonized the Philippines, there were millions of Roman Catholic Filipinos already. Ultimately, the American Senate narrowly voted to give the two-thirds vote needed for annexation of the Philippines. Now, there was opposition, of course. Some in America believed that Filipinos had a right to govern themselves, that the United States would be losing its virtue through this expansionist policy. Racist concerns, even of racial mixing, as white Americans would interact with Filipinos. Prominent American author Mark Twain would be a vocal opponent who argued that the United States should be a protector, not an oppressor of Filipinos. And the costs of occupation and colonization were seen by some to be a crippling impact on the economy. In 1900, the debate over the annexation would be a center debate in the presidential election between William McKinley and Democrat William Jennings Bryan. But it was ultimately overshadowed by domestic financial issues. William McKinley's recent victorious war against Spain, though, was incredibly popular, and it contributed to his election, where both houses were ultimately taken by the Republican Party of McKinley. Following annexation, the United States would begin a brutal war with Filipino nationalists for the next 4 years. This Filipino American War would see the Americans expend hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of soldiers in the Philippines. Now, while this war was comparatively small, it does mark the highest casualty rate for American soldiers in any foreign war that the United States has fought in. Over 200,000 Filipinos would die in this conflict, the vast majority being civilians, as thousands of them would also be rounded up into concentration camps to separate them from what were deemed insurgents. Emilio Aguinaldo was ultimately captured in March of 1901, and the war was declared over by 1902 in July. But guerrilla fighting would continue for years to come in the Philippines. That's all we've got today. We'll catch you next time. MindRiotRocks.com. Mind Riot Rocks on all your socials. Talk to you later.